there are many misconceptions, I think, in the enterprise about technology. One of them being certainly that the leader of your technology has to understand the technology in depth, right? Like it just changes too often, and I think there are too many other responsibilities. But what are some of the other misconceptions you think are going on? What's the biggest misconception you think?
The number one thing I see is the business partners looking at it and saying, IT moves too slow. The tech's too slow. We can't leverage the tech. You guys are too slow. And to a certain extent, that might be right. But I think they lose the perspective of why it's slow. It's not plug it in, turn it on, hit the button, and go. There's work that needs to be done in order to have it work. So I used to use the phrase, I go, yeah, short-term gain, long-term pain. We're trying to keep you out of that, right? We want to make sure now we need to move faster. The IT groups, we need to get that out of the way. But I think there's a misconception that technology is. I think these cloud providers have made it look like, how hard is it? Yada yada yada. You push the button, you got no. That yada 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 is where all the work needs to be done, right? So that is a misconception and it's not technology. It's getting the business people to be able to put their processes into rules, not guidelines. You've heard me say this for years. Always is cheap, sometimes is expensive. And whenever I would walk into a business and they would go, well, sometimes we do this, and sometimes they go, you're never going to get technology to work for you. You've got to be able to make tough business decisions to get the technology to work. So that to me is one of the misconceptions I see. It's not a technical problem a lot of times. It's a business process problem that I see.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, right? Like the number of organizations I've worked with where they just think technology is the silver bullet to whatever the problem is,
Yeah.
right? Like, I have this issue. I'm going to apply some of this technology, some Salesforce, and now my life is going to be better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I
it
bought Salesforce. How come I can't? How come my sales haven't gone up? Right? Well, I bought it. Well, we got to use it. You got to change your business processes, maybe. So change management is a critical component of are you changing the business process? It's there used to have the old thing about we bought the car. Then they push the car instead of getting rid of the horse. Don't get in the car, learn how to drive a car because you got a new capability now. So are you ready for the change management? And again, like I said, those aren't technical issues; those are business process issues, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is the piece that for me, in terms of the misconception, is understanding that the enterprise is an ecosystem, right? It's fascinating to me, little people respect or understand that it is an ecosystem, right? There are many things that are going on. It's like, trying to open a subway station in a city. Like, you're going to impact a bunch of things because there's already streets and buildings and pipes and right. Like, there are a lot of things to think about. And the piece that always is interesting to me about IT is how little respect there is for design. Whether you think about that from an ecosystem perspective, or you think about even at a individual system level, right? Like, I think agile methodology famously, like, one of their principles is, no documentation, right? Like, or less documentation over code.
Less documentation. I have no documentation. Less documentation. Yeah.
But I think that it's almost singularly unique amongst industries, right? You can't imagine another industry that would basically deliver a product without design. You would never get into an airplane that didn't have design done. Your clothes are designed, right? Like, somebody thinks about, like, how does it come together, and then how does it get manufactured? Your automobiles are that way, right? Houses are built that way. Like, would you hire a builder without an architectural blueprint, right? But it's amazing to me. I was an architect for 15 years. That job was an influence job. It was never that architecture was baked into the development life cycle, right? It was never part of it. Implementation, and to the detriment of many organizations, I got to work on a lot of stuff where I'm untangling this mess because nobody ever thought about it. And I think it's probably the piece that surprises me the most, I think, about technology is the absence of respect or value for design.
I'll validate that with the fact that two or 3 years ago, I went and got a postgraduate degree in design thinking because I thought it was such a critical component. And I ran my own shop for 25 years where we built custom apps. And yeah, I used to always say the design is critical. How many times we delivered software that just didn't get used because it wasn't intuitive, it didn't make sense, they didn't understand. If I have to train someone how to use my software, I think I missed the mark, right? I needed to be functional. I worked on a big multi-million-dollar project one time. We had this initial release that went out, and we were all sitting around waiting for the first bug reports to come in. And the first bug report came in and said, when I hit F9, nothing happens. I'm like, okay, I need more detail. What did you think F9 was supposed to happen? And it turned out it was an old, if you remember Lotus Notes, right? Now I go to Clippy, now I go to Lotus Notes, but my old legacy tools. But it was a distributed piece. And what F9 did, it synced all the databases up. We didn't know what they were talking. We didn't need to do that anymore, right? But we didn't educate the users on what their expectations were and how these things work. Those requirements are going to show themselves. They're better to get them at the beginning than when you deploy the code. Right? To say that, wait, this doesn't work the way I want it to. As someone I made my living doing that. I got really good at listening to what the customer wanted, but making sure I also gave them what they needed for today and tomorrow. And design, to me, design was always understanding what's the business value, what's the business process, the business tools aside. When you push that button, what do you think is going to happen? I need to know that. And that's where I think where that design gap brings those consequences.
Yeah. I used to work for a big software company, and I remember this project vividly because at that company there were 5 major systems that handled information about customers and partners, but these were all run out of separate groups, and so each one built their own data, their own database for that customer or partner, and they overlap, right? Because they had lots of interactions with these folks. And the data was so out of sync because these groups didn't talk to each other. They were perfect silos, that for the CEO to get information on the top 50 customers was an exercise, a manual exercise for some team that would take them a month. So if the CEO was doing a customer visit, he had to give 30-day notice to his team to be able to pull together all of the information across the systems. All because you couldn't get agreement on something as simple as, well, what is the definition of a customer, right? And how do we singularly identify them across all of our processes and all of our core systems? And just again, that absence of, hey, if I'm going to build a system, maybe I should understand how I'm handling data right across all of my processes.
Well, it's that enterprise view. Do you have an enterprise view? So I worked for a company where I think it was that software company that you worked for, you're talking about, came in and said, do you know how much money we spend with you? And we said, no. And they go, well, we do. Because we didn't. We could, that's a typical problem, right? To be able to answer that, how do I bring my data all together? But again, I think this is why I think when I hear digital transformation as the key buzzword, really to me, what I'm hearing is we need enterprise architecture. We need to bring and look at a holistic view of how these puzzle pieces, we talked about composability. We talked about agentic AI. It's the enterprise needs to be composable so we can make it scale, so we can make it pivot. And having that design methodology and a framework to solution in is a critical part of it that a lot of times I think gets glazed over. And I think it's critically important.
Yeah. And I think just not even from a functional perspective, but just even a cost perspective, right? Like, I spent a lot of time arguing with teams, especially internal development teams, about, okay, if we build it wrong, but we'll just iterate and, we'll iterate and make it better. I'm like, okay, well, that's great, but that's going to take you time and money, where if you spent just a little bit of time doing design, you don't have to do it over. I'm like, it's one thing to rebuild and iterate when that's an app that makes you money, right? So if you're earning revenue off of it, then you can justify it because you've got revenue coming in to cover your cost of development. But on an internal app where, you're a cost center, you can't afford to continue to build over and over and over and over.
No. And this is how IT gets that bad reputation where the business thinks we're too slow and we don't function right because they are making they're trying to sometimes guess. Like, look, when I had my development team back in the day, I told them there's 2 ways to code. There's the team's way and the wrong way. And they're not, right and wrong in terms of that's bad code. It's you're not helping us make money. We're all here in a company to make money, so all code the same way. Now, if you have a better way, come convince the team, and then we'll all do it the new way. But if you're coding that way, and he's coding that way, and she's coding that way, that's chaos. And that's just, we can't scale, we can't change, we've lost our agility. Standardization always is cheap, sometimes expensive. I've been saying it forever. I am a firm believer in it. And I always say, sometimes it's important, right? We want to free up that capacity. So you put that good design work into your solution, so you enable the business with your tools that they need. Now you've freed up their capacity to go work on what the business value truly is, right? What is it the business wants to do? They're not spending the time on, 5 different storage patterns and networking patterns and API patterns. That's all standard. Capacity is now freed up to go work on how do we beat the competition? That's where you need to put the capacity, right? So
100%.